We're still recovering from the beatdown at the hands of the Dallas Mavericks last night on Locked On Kings. And I guess part of the healing process is collabing with Locked On Mavericks. Nick Angstadt joins me. We're going to talk about last night's game, preview Friday's massive rematch right here on Locked On Kings.
You are Locked On Kings, your daily Sacramento Kings podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And now, ladies and gentlemen, it is that time for another episode of Locked On Kings.
Hello and welcome into Locked On Kings, your podcast hub for Sacramento Kings coverage all season long. My name is Matt George. I have the privilege of being your host here. I'm a Sacramento sports anchor and reporter for ABC 10 News. Well, I hope you got a good night's sleep last night. I hope that it was able to wash away all the feelings and frustrations and pain of the Kings' 36-point loss to Dallas, the biggest game of the season so far for Sacramento. And they got their heads kicked in, for lack of a better term. The good news is they have another shot at the Mavericks on Friday. They're already up 2-1 on the season series, meaning they win. And regardless of what happened yesterday, they have the tiebreaker. They're even with the Mavericks in the standings. But because you would have the tiebreaker in that situation, you're essentially even you're ahead of the Mavericks, even though you're tied in the standings. So there's still a lot for the Sacramento Kings to play for. They have shown a tendency over these past two seasons to bounce back really well after bad losses. So that should be both the hope and the expectation for the Kings inside the Golden One Center on Friday night. That is something that Nick Angstadt and I talk about in great detail. I'm going to ask Nick some questions from the Mavericks perspective on what happened. He's going to ask me the Kings perspective on what happened last night. And then we're going to focus on and preview a lot of what needs to happen for both teams to be successful on Friday. So please enjoy this crossover episode with Locked On Mavericks and Nick Angstadt.
All right, welcome in. Nick Angstadt from Locked On Mavs here with Matt George from Locked On Kings, and we're here to talk about Mavs versus Kings, this mini playoff series that felt so contentious until the game was actually played, and then the Mavs got the win, shot an insane percentage from three. But we're gonna do this. I'm gonna ask questions about the Kings to Matt. Matt's gonna ask questions to me about the Mavs, and then at the end we'll share one thing that each team needs to do to win the next game, which is incredibly important. So Matt, let's start with you. Ask me some questions about the Dallas Mavericks and their 132-96 win over the Kings.
Okay, question number one. I blacked out in the second half. What happened? Oh my goodness gracious!
So I'll tell you the good news about it. Luka Doncic scored 2 points in the second half.
That's great Kings defense,
right?
What I take away from that is Luka was a scrub in the second half. That's what I take away from that. Luka was absolutely not good. Kings shut him down.
Benched in the fourth quarter.
Jason Kidd.
Hey, guess what?
Luka.
You know what? They don't need Luka.
No, they don't. Marvin Bagley would have had 30 last night. I just want that to be known. Just 30 seconds played. That's what I mean. Or 30
Marvin
injuries.
Bagley.
Regardless, hey man, look, I expect Dallas Mavericks fans to take their victory laps. I will say this: Raccoon Squad, get the hell out of my comment section, you bunch of trash pandas. You absolute jerk. Nick Angstadt sent me. Go away. Go away.
Squad
all right?
coming through strong last night in the comment section.
Scoreboard still says 2-1. Okay,
that's
2-1
right.
Sacramento Kings. Although ultimate bragging rights go to the Mavs right now because they're ahead in the standings. I get that. Friday's game is massive. What I want to start with is this. The Kings, what they've done recently a lot better, Nick, is defend the three-point shot. That has been like the bane of their existence this season. They've been giving up way too high percentages from three. The 8 games before last night's loss to the Mavericks, they've done a much better job defending the three. Guys not named Luka and Kyrie went 14 of 22 from three-point range last night. Should Kings fans or should the Kings themselves feel pretty confident that they can't hope that this is what's going to happen for them to win on Friday, but should they feel pretty confident that the Mavericks aren't going to be able to shoot that well? The supporting cast is not going to be able to shoot that well again.
I'm going to go full politician with this answer. So I'm going to answer with the thumb as well, pointing. Yes and no. So the answer is of course not. I did not expect them to shoot that well. Now the Mavericks were due for a good shooting game. They had solid 3-point shooters like Tim Hardaway, Luka, Kyrie, whoever, just not shooting well at all. Even PJ Washington has been shooting like 19% from three in the last couple of weeks. Just, he's normally like a 35% three-point shooter, but just shooting way under his numbers. And so the Mavs were due for some kind of regression. They just got it all in one game, basically, from all these guys. The thing about it, though, that, like, yes, the Mavs aren't going to shoot that well from three in the next game, probably. But the other thing is the Mavs have won games not shooting the three ball well since these trades. Before the Mavericks made the trades for PJ Washington and for Daniel Gafford, and I say a lot of things on Locked On Mavs now, pre-trade and post-trades, because it's just completely changed the entire complex of this team.
Right.
The Mavericks before the trades this season were 0-7 in games they shot under 30% from three. Since then, I think they're 6-2 now because they won a game the other night in games where they shot under 30% from three. So they're shooting under 30% from three in like a lot of the games that they've played since then, but they find other ways to win. And so, yes, the three-point shooting is going to come back down to earth, but they do find other ways to win. They get in the paint. They have the pick and roll threats all the time. They get out in transition. They score, fast break points. I know the Kings didn't do a lot of that last night, but the Mavs, like, they score points off turnovers. Like, they just find different ways to score. And then Luka and Kyrie can give them just enough. And so the three-point shooting is kind of one of the big focuses. And it kind of is for the Mavs, too, to try and get, like, all right, can we get any kind of three-point shooting? Because it just hasn't been great so far, even though they've been finding ways to win without it.
A couple of things stood out to me from the Kings post-game perspective. I'll present them both to you, each with a question attached. The first one is the Kings were caught off guard a little bit, or caught by surprise with how Dallas defended them. It's no surprise that the Kings are trying to get downhill. They're trying to touch the paint, get spray threes, which is a pillar of Mike Brown's offense, something that the Mavericks did an excellent job of. Mike was talking last night, like the Mavericks beat the Kings at their game last night with the fast break, the spray threes, everything. But what the Mavericks did that the Kings were pointing out a lot that they didn't necessarily expect was they were defending high. They were coming up. Gafford, whoever it was, the bigs were coming up and playing high and forcing the Kings to scramble a little bit and not really get into their offense, starting at the perimeter, not just in the paint, where, of course, the defense would then collapse if the Kings tried to get inside, which is normal. What did you see? Did you see anything that the Mavs did differently defensively last night to what they normally do, or were the Kings just not prepared for a Mavs style of defense last night?
The Mavs defense has been predicated for, oh my gosh, years now. It seems like predicated on effort and predicated on, all right, we have this rotating defense where we're going to, rotate and help over here. And then the guy that's farthest away has to run over and rotate. And like, when the Mavericks aren't putting in that effort, when Luka or Kyrie or Tim Hardaway Jr. or somebody, I'm not going to name names, even though I just did, when somebody doesn't put in the right effort and like rotate to the guy that they're supposed to, the defense completely falls apart and just like the bottom falls out. And so the Mavs very recently had a stretch where they lost 5 of 6 games, and they played 2 games against the Pacers where their defense looked like not an NBA defense at all. Like it looked like, it was worse than the Wizards, basically. It was terrible to watch. It didn't look like any of their fundamentals were there. It didn't look like the Mavs were even trying. And so I was at the point where I was like, man, they've got to change something, get this right, something. Coaching staff is not getting any kind of semblance of defense out of this group. And if that's going to be the case, then get rid of Jason Kidd now, because this team's never going to win if they don't. And then they've completely changed it around since then. And they always have kind of had this, in the Luka era, they've kind of had this, like, all right, we're going to turn it on a little bit on defense because it's predicated on effort. It's predicated on finishing plays, getting rebounds. They've gotten much better as a rebounding team since the trades, adding Gafford. So they have Lively or Gafford on the court at all times. PJ Washington's a bigger wing than Grant Williams was. And so finishing plays, putting in that right kind of effort, I think that's been the big thing that changed. I don't know that I saw anything schematically against the Kings that was like very different than what the Mavs have done. The thing that kind of stood out to me that I talked about on Locked On Mavs is I thought like Derek Lively did a great job on Sabonis in the third quarter.
I agree.
Sabonis like 3 or 4 times tried to take it to him in the post. And after Lively bit on that pump fake in the first quarter that was just like really embarrassing, he didn't bite on it at all after that and just did a really good job defending him. What did you see on that side of it from like them defending Sabonis?
Well, I thought they were patient to your point about not biting on the pump fakes, but I thought what they did a very good job of is they swarmed the basketball. Sabonis likes to initiate contact. He likes to play physical. They played straight up. They took it in the chest, even though some of you people like to take that and run with it and pretend he plays dirty when he absolutely does not.
He is the pushiest player in the NBA.
He plays a physical
Pushes per minute is like the highest, I think.
He is undersized as a center. And you can't be talking about pushes when Luka Doncic uses a stiff arm every time he dribbles the basketball. De'Aaron Fox
gets shoulder. It's a stiff shoulder.
Sorry, stiff shoulder. Fox gets called for it, and Luka doesn't, by the way. But we don't have to go down that rabbit hole. But to answer your question, I thought the Mavs did a good job of staying patient with Sabonis, swarming Sabonis when he got deep position, and then doing a good job of cutting off the passing lane so Sabonis couldn't get the ball out. And even when he did get the ball out, the Kings weren't knocking down shots. So they were making the right gamble of daring someone to beat them on the perimeter. It was the right call last night. But the other thing post-game that stood out to me, Nick, that I wanted to ask you about really quickly, and I talked about this a lot on Locked On Kings, Mike Brown and I kind of flipped the script last night, because a lot this season I've talked about, man, the defense is bad, but the offense is what the Kings are known for, and it just hasn't been good enough. And Mike's been typically answering my questions with, like, the offense is fine. Defensively, we got to be better. We got to be better. Last night, Mike Brown said, we lost this game because of our offense. The Kings gave up 130 plus points, but he's saying we lost because of our offense. And he said the Kings offense led to a lot of the offensive opportunities, led to a lot of the rhythm for the Dallas Mavericks. I'm curious, the way you look at that game, the Kings got beat on both ends of the floor. No ifs, ands, or buts about it. But where did you see the biggest weakness for Sacramento? Was on the offensive or defensive end? Or what caught you by surprise that the Mavs were able to dominate more?
Yeah, I was surprised by the Kings offense too. I heard you say that on the post-game show, and I was surprised that the Kings, I felt like they settled for a lot of shots. Felt like they, in the second quarter, it felt like Fox had started to get into a rhythm and figuring out how to get to his spots and pull up for floaters. And then I thought, okay, the Mavs are going to have to adjust here, and then they'll kick out to shooters. But when the Mavs are rotating, and like they got lucky on a couple of shots, Kings shot 36% from three, but they only took 30. Like, it didn't feel like the Kings were playing their own style of offense, really.
Correct.
The Mavs were very physical with him. I was joking earlier. We were joking earlier about the pushing back and forth, but it was a very physical game, and the refs let them away with a lot of stuff last night, like a lot of stuff under the rim and all that. And then the perimeter, if you grabbed somebody, it felt like it was a foul. It was like a very, very weirdly officiated game in that way. But yeah, I was surprised by the Kings offense because I just kept waiting for them to go on some kind of run, and I think a lot of it was the transition offense. Like, the Mavs transition defense was there, and the Kings didn't get any easy baskets where the Mavs were on the other end. Like, you get a little bit of a run starting when, like, Kyrie beats everybody on the floor, Lively beats everybody, and Luka hits him with a pass down the floor, and you get a couple of those easy buckets that way. It really started to snowball for him. And so, coming up, let's talk about the Kings side of this. Let's talk about, I want to know what was the most concerning part of the Kings loss last night, looking towards that Friday matchup between these two teams. Talk about all that and more coming up.
Today's episode of the Locked On Kings podcast is brought to you by eBay Motors. Passion, drive, and patience. What brings home the winning trophy is also what keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors has everything that you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance, from superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and more. Whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has got you covered. With over 122 million parts to choose from, you'll always find exactly what you're looking for. And with eBay Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time, or you get your money back. Because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not burning cash. With all the parts you need at the prices that you want, it's easy to turn your car into the MVP and bring home that win. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. eBay Guaranteed Fit, only available to U.S. customers.
All right, back here, Locked On Mavs, Locked On Kings crossover. My turn now. Turn the tables on Matt George. We're going to talk about I have questions about the Kings and about the Kings side of it. What was your most concerning thing after that game? It's 132-96 loss, but what's the most concerning thing you look at and go, man, like, this is not who we are, or this is what I'm most concerned about against this Mavs team in a game that's coming up again?
Well, first off, bringing up the final score wasn't necessary, and I take that as an offense. So we don't have to talk. We don't have to. It's over. It's in the past.
Were you concerned by the final score?
Just a little. I mean, a wee bit. Biggest game of the year, and you almost lost by 40 points. No big deal. Oof. But I mean, funny enough, Nick, like, if you had listened to Locked On Kings a week and a half ago when the Kings lost on the road to the Washington Wizards, I blew a gasket on that post-game show.
As you
should.
And
the Kings have lost to the Wizards. They've lost to the Rockets 3 times, and the Rockets are a pretty decent team now. They're not in the same category as the Wizards. They've lost to the Hornets. They've lost to some of the worst teams in the NBA. One of the few teams in the league that have lost to everybody in the cellar except for the San Antonio Spurs at this point. So they've had some losses that were, I think, way worse than last night's loss, despite the fact that it was only a 4 or 6 point loss versus a 36 point loss, right? There was a lot about last night's game that I'm really not majorly concerned about, because the Kings have had a pattern consistently. I need Mavs fans to understand this. This is not cockiness. The Kings have gotten blown out multiple times this season, and almost every single time, except for one that I can remember, they've responded well. So the expectation in Sacramento on Friday is that there is going to be a good response. That doesn't mean that the Kings are going to win, but that means that what the Mavericks saw from the Kings on Tuesday, I don't think is going to be similar at all to what they see on Friday. Now, if the Mavs beat the Kings down again, then we got some alarm bells going off, right? But what concerned me the most, Nick, and I talked about this last night too, last season, the Kings offensively showed that they can outscore anybody, and they can go on these unstoppable stretches and on these unstoppable runs where even Kevin Durant was going on his podcast going like, what do we do? The offense this season just is not the same. Now, the good news is the defense has gotten better, and in the playoffs, which is ultimately what this season's about, in the playoffs, the Kings offense wasn't good against the Warriors. Their defense is what made that a best of 7 series. So the Kings are kind of preparing for that now with the way that they've been playing. But when the Kings went down 12, then 14, then 16 in the third quarter, even though they're more than capable of rattling off a 10-0 run and getting right back into it, me being there, the energy in the building was, God, I don't think the Kings are going to be able to string anything together tonight. So the biggest concern with me, Nick, to answer your question, is offensively, it feels like the Kings have lost that firepower and that ruthlessness that they had last season that teams feared. It also happens to be a second season to where now teams aren't caught by surprise anymore. Kings know or rather teams know what the Kings are bringing. So my concern is definitely on the offensive end of this team's ability to work themselves out of a big hole when they put themselves into one.
Yeah, that was the thing I noticed about this. I've noticed about this Kings team overall is they're 3 points per 100 possessions worse offensively than they were last season. Last season, kind of unsustainable, almost 120 points per 100 possessions. This season, 117. But they went from but the NBA though has completely caught up offensively.
Correct.
Last year the Kings were first. This year they dropped 3 points, which you're like, okay, 3 points. That's like not a ton. 14th. They're like an average offense this season, 117 points per 100 possession, which used to be one of the greatest marks in NBA history. Why? Right. What's been the biggest difference between the Kings offense last year and this year?
One, I think, again, teams are not caught by surprise with Sacramento. Two is I think this Kings team has overestimated themselves as a three-point shooting team. On paper, this team looks like a team that's stacked with shooters, but this Kings team lives and dies by the three-point shot. And it's not so much that they're chucking from three, although they've done that from time to time. And this is what Mike Brown has pointed out a lot. The quality of threes that they've been getting in a lot of games just hasn't been up to par. Like last night, for example, spray threes, which is paint touches, getting into the paint and then kicking it out from three. Mike's goal is for the Kings to generate 20 spray three attempts a game, and he can live with the results, right? In the first half, the Kings were 5 of 10 from spray threes, 50% on 10 generated looks. That's really, really good. That's why they were only down 6 despite Luka Doncic going MVP mode. In the second half, they were 1 for 4. So 3-point shooting is in so many ways, the lifeblood of this Kings offense. You'd think it'd be pace and transition, and it still is because their transition usually leads to a lot of spray threes and good looks. But if this team is cold from the perimeter, they really, really struggle to win. Now, what we've seen recently is they can survive a little bit better being cold from three-point range with this newfound offense, which is predicated on physicality. And the Kings played physical last night, but the Mavericks carved up that physicality in the second half, which is why the Kings ended up where they were at.
The other thing, the stat I've been monitoring for the Mavs is points in the paint, and the Kings only scored 38 points in the paint, which is a really big thing as well. We'll talk about that a little bit later when I talk about one thing the Mavs need to do. Well, I want to talk about the Kings defense. So you talked about this newfound defense for the Kings. They've had some really good defensive games the last couple of weeks. When they're defending well, what are they doing right? Like what are the principles or what are the things that this Kings defense does when you're like, oh, it's working, like it's doing what it's supposed to be doing?
They go back to the basics. And what I mean by that is Mike Brown has talked about this a lot. Mike Brown and the Kings had to spend time in practice this year going over basic closeouts on defense. Now that sounds like wow, that's kind of pathetic, because that's something like a high five closeout on the perimeter is what the Kings have had to work on. This is basic stuff you learn in high school or earlier than that, right? Which is closing out on a shooter, not running into them, but going past them to the side and trying to essentially high five them at the top of their jump shot without making contact, right? That's the best way you can close out. The Kings have done a much better job closing out from the perimeter, because the reality is, and Mike pointed this out earlier, if the Kings were average with their perimeter defense, we're talking 15th, 16th, 17th in the league, they'd be a top 10 defense. But because they are one of the worst, if not the worst, 3-point defensive team in the league, they're in the bottom half. In the month of March, they've been doing a significantly better job with closeouts, with defending the perimeter. So it all starts there. The Dallas Mavericks won that game last night because they could not miss from 3-point range, number one. But number two, Sacramento was not doing a good enough job trying to run them off the 3-point line. They naturally had to give shooters space, because when you're guarding Kyrie and you're guarding Luka Doncic, it's help, which is usually an advantage that the Kings have with De'Aaron Fox and Malik Monk on the other end of the floor. So I understand that very well. There's only so much you can do. You have to help out on those two ball handlers, but you have to do a better job closing out from the perimeter, which the Kings did not do. That's been a major success of this Kings team as of late, and it was nowhere to be found last night.
Coming up, let's talk about one thing the Mavs need to do, one thing the Kings need to do to get the win on Friday. And then I kind of want to talk about how each team views the playoff picture right now, because it is kind of insane where they are right now. So let's talk about that coming up.
Today's episode of the Locked On Kings podcast is brought to you by Amazon Fire TV. Fire TV is your destination for sports, from live games to highlights to in-depth analysis. Fire TV offers amazing viewing experiences on smart TVs, as well as the Fire TV stick that you can plug into your existing TV to provide access to millions of movies and TV episodes, as well as free and live television. Whether it's opening week for baseball this week, college basketball tournament, you're going to want to have Fire TV. Fire TV recently created Fire TV channels to deliver a constant supply of latest videos from your favorite sports brands, all for free. That includes all of us here at Locked On and most of big pro leagues and college conference as well. Fire TV channels let you dive into all of the game analysis, highlights, and more to keep up to date on all the latest in the world of sports, March Madness, NBA, MLB, and so much more. Not to mention great news, entertainment, gaming, travel, cooking videos as well. There's so much for you. Check out Fire TV channels on Fire TV and Alexa devices. If you haven't checked out Fire TV channels, you should. Trust me on this. To learn more, visit www.amazon.com/LockedOnFireTV. And today's episode of the Locked On Kings podcast is brought to you by Nissan. Are you the kind of driver that likes to push things a little further? Ever wonder what adventures could be around the next corner? Our friends at Nissan have a lineup of SUVs with the capabilities to take your adventure to a new level. The 2024 Nissan Rogue is perfect for city drives and great escapes. Class exclusive Google is built in as your always updating assistant to call on for almost anything. Gone are the days of connecting your phone. They have Google Assistant, Google Maps, Google Play Store, all built in to the 12.3-inch HD touchscreen infotainment system. The 2024 Rogue is the perfect midsize crossover for your next adventure. Plus, they have the 2024 Nissan Pathfinder. Has room up to 8, an expansive cargo capacity, and advanced 4x4 capability with 284 horsepower and up to 6,000 pounds of towing. When adventure calls, the Pathfinder is there to answer. Take the Nissan Rogue, Nissan Pathfinder, or the Nissan Armada and go find your next big adventure. Shop NissanUSA.com.
All right, Matt, let's talk about one thing each team needs to do to get a win on Friday. I think for the Mavericks, I mentioned this earlier, the points in the paint. The Kings this season, including last night's game, are 4-16 when they score under 45 points in the paint. The Mavs held them to 38 last night. And so if they can contain the paint, they contain Sabonis, they contain those spray threes in a way, like, all right, we're not allowing you to have this, and just, all right, you got to beat us on the three. You got to do the same thing the Mavs did to the Kings. You have to hit 56% from three or whatever. I think they need to contain the paint again. I think that's a real key for the Mavericks. And with two centers in Gafford and Lively that I thought played pretty well last night, even with the fouls and everything, I thought that they did a great job, and they got that done last night. I think they can do it again on Friday.
Yeah, I mean, I 100% agree with you. Now, the Kings have actually, weirdly enough, this is like the third game in recent memory that the Kings have had less than 40 points in the paint. And I mean, that's been kind of a theme of this stretch as of late. And I think it also goes to the universal game plan that the Mavericks are privy to and every team was privy to, which is swarm the paint, muddy up the paint, and force Sabonis to play as physical as he has to and not let the Kings get those paint touches and get that success around the rim that they're used to. So it's an absolute right game plan for Jason Kidd. Force the Kings to beat it. And the Kings have not always consistently been able to do so. They found cracks before, and a lot of it has to do with the three-point shooting. If you can knock down your threes and force the defense to spread out a little bit more, get Malik Monk going, because Malik was not good last night. If Malik is shooting the way that Malik's capable of shooting, you can't necessarily play that defense like the Mavs played all the time. So you're spot on there.
He had that alley-oop, though, that was... I thought for sure that alley-oop in the third quarter, I thought for sure was going to like spark a run where all of a sudden, it kind of did. They went on like a 7-0 run or something at the end of the third, but I thought that was about to spark like, oh God, here come the Kings. They're coming back.
That's what we were all hoping for too. And then, and then that 5-0 start for the Mavericks to the fourth quarter, it was like, all right, turn out the lights pretty quickly. So the Mavs did a fantastic job of stopping things before they could get even close to getting out of hand, and I give them credit for. For me, again, I'm going to go on the defensive end, even though the offense was not good enough at all. Don't let the supporting cast beat you. If Luka and Kyrie beat you by combining for 90 points, okay. But you can't let PJ Washington, you can't let Gafford, you can't let Lively. Tim Hardaway Jr., I'm naturally terrified of because he's that archetype of player that typically cooks the Kings.
Mavs fans are scared of Tim Hardaway Jr. too.
Look, I understand that, but he's
that
been
good the last two games. Though.
So don't let the Mavs supporting cast beat you again. Right. You can live with Luka and Kyrie. And the way it was shaping up, I was thinking, okay, this is going to be a close game. Luka's going to be going for 50, and it might come down to Luka just hitting a couple big shots down the stretch. And you're just like, okay, tip your cap. You can't live with, I don't expect the Mavs to go 14 to 22 again, but at the same time, don't give them 22 good freaking looks and hope that they're going to miss. Right. So for me, it's limit the supporting cast as much as possible. If you do that, even if the game is close, the Kings aren't going to win by a blowout by any means. But if you do that, then Sacramento has more than their fair chance of winning that game.
Yeah, the legs for Sacramento too. You had played 5 in 7 days or something like that. Yeah. I mean, that affected the defense too, and that affected the snowball of it. I think too, where maybe the Mavs, like if they had been more rested, maybe the Mavs win that game by 10 instead of like 36 or whatever. But yeah, I think that affected that. So I don't think it was as like, oh, the Mavericks are 2 heads better than better than the Kings.
Yeah, I think the Kings also played a little bit last night, Nick, and now this isn't acceptable by any means. I think the Kings played last night like they knew they had another crack at it and they only needed one for the tiebreaker. Right. The Kings kind of played last night like Mike Brown emptied the bench with 6 minutes left. Granted, you were only down 40, so whatever. But you had tired legs. There's no reason to keep him out there. Like the Kings know that Friday's a massive game. So I expect Sacramento to look significantly different and more engaged on Friday. I also expect the Mavs to expect that. So I think Friday's going to be a more accurate look of how close these two teams are and how major of a battle it is. That could also be wishful thinking after a 36-point loss. But look, these two teams are neck and neck for a reason. They both are loaded with talent. They both have supporting casts that can be rain or shine or good or bad. We just don't know on any given night. So there's a reason why these two teams are where they're at in the standings right now. And I think it leads to good for all of us as an audience. Hopefully we get a more entertaining basketball game.
Well, the first half, at least, I was fully entertained by it. And the rest of it I was too. But like as a basketball fan, the energy, like what was the atmosphere like in the arena? Did it feel like it was a playoff-esque atmosphere?
Yes and no. I mean, I think Kings fans knew that it was a big game and there was decent energy in the first half. There was also a lot of, I think Luka was just so brilliant in the first half too. The Kings fans were just like, wow. But the Mavs did shut up. The Mavs did a masterful job. You can stop that, by the way. It's been enough time. The Kings are fine, Nick. It's been enough time, okay? Shut up.
Didn't think you heard me.
No, go away. Honestly, the Mavs did a fantastic job of taking that crowd out of it and limiting the energy that the Kings get and feed off from that crowd. But oddly enough, the Kings have been better on the road the last 2 seasons at generating their own energy than they've been at home, which is strange. So we'll just have to wait and see how that goes on Friday.
How do the Kings look at the playoff picture right now? Because for the Mavs, for the Mavs, it's like, all right, got to get to 6 because you just don't want any part of that play-in. But like, if they're in a play-in, I don't know. I feel like the Mavs could win one of those games now with the way that they play. But yeah, it's kind of like, all right, we're looking at got to get to 6, and then like what? I guess let's do it this way. Is there like a team that the Kings are scared of in the play-in or the lower section of the West standings right now?
All of them, and I say that not
wild.
I say that not to roll, because the idea of the play-in terrifies me and should terrify the Kings, because the Kings are more than capable of beating anybody on any given night. They've also proven they're more than capable of losing to anybody on any given night. I mean, that's just sports in a nutshell. But the idea of the Kings are a significantly better team than the Golden State Warriors. The Kings own the Los Angeles Lakers. But you invite either of those teams into your building for a one-game playoff, what's to stop
40.
Steph from going for 50? What's to
40
stop
free throws?
What's to stop LeBron? It's basically a game 7. Anything can happen.
Yeah.
The play-in is terrifying to me. And we just got an example. Imagine if it was Kings and Mavericks in the play-in last night. The Mavs just rolled Sacramento in a one game. Meanwhile, the Kings are up 2-1 on a series. If it was Kings Mavs in a best-of-7 series, I like the Kings better in that situation, although those two teams are way evenly matched compared to Kings and Lakers or Kings Warriors, in my opinion. But the play-in in general scares the crap out of me, Nick, because at that point, it comes down to one game. Anything can. It's like NCAA March Madness. And when you have teams in the play-in right now that are loaded with talent that might be sunsetting on their careers, but is capable of having that Hall of Fame type performance on any given night, and the stage is big, I don't know how Sacramento fares in that versus if the Kings got a shot at the Lakers in a best-of-7 series, I think the Kings would win in 5 or 6 because they own them in that way. So the Kings making the 6th seed and going into the playoffs outright should be a very major sense of urgency, in my opinion. I don't know if the Kings treat it the same way, but I'm terrified of the plan.
Yeah, the play-in, if the Mavs are in the play-in and it's Mavs, Suns, Lakers, Warriors, how insane is that? It's Luka, Kyrie, Booker, Durant, LeBron, AD, and Steph.
The NBA is thrilled,
man. Holy
cow. The NBA
cow.
loves it. The NBA is like, this is exactly what we wanted, man. It's huge. Those are massive games every single night. So the Kings want to avoid that, please.
The Mavs are only a game back now from the Pelicans, and the Clippers play tonight. So we'll see what happens with that. But they're only a game and a half out of the Clippers too. And like the 4-5 is not completely out of the picture. And if the Mavs can go 4-5, even if Denver is 1, if the Mavs go 4-5 and it's Clippers or Pelicans, where Pelicans are maybe without Brandon Ingram and Clippers have not looked like a playoff team the last couple of weeks. I mean, that's where their sights are, I think, right now. So
good.
All right. Let's avoid that.
Do me a favor. You pay attention to 4-5 and don't worry too much about Friday. And then when Friday comes around, Sacramento's got to
They got to keep winning every game in front of them. I mean, that's the thing, is that you can't overlook any team. King's schedule down the stretch is pretty tough, though, right?
Yes, but at the same time, that's almost more encouraging because the Kings tend to play well.
They just tell me that they lost the Wizards and the Hornets.
This is what the Mavericks have done well that the Kings have not in this race, which is the Mavs are winning the games that they're supposed to win. 2 straight games in Utah. I know the second one was a little testy at times, but they found a way to win both those games. The Kings had a decent road trip. They beat Toronto, they beat Orlando, but losing to Washington, that's the difference right now in the standings, or at least half a game difference right now in the standings. So like the Mavs have done a really, really good job of handling the games that they're supposed to win. And that is something that the Kings have struggled with, not just this season, Nick. They've struggled with that for 20 years. Then again, there haven't been a lot of games that they were supposed to win over the last 20 years.
I was going to say, that's insane. Is there a key player down the stretch that you're watching for the Kings? Like this guy's got to step it up or this guy's got to be good the rest of the way?
I mean, the Kings are so reliant upon how their main 3, which is Fox, Sabonis, and Monk, do. But I think Keegan Murray's a big part of this as well, because Keegan has developed into a significantly better defender than I think we expected at this point. That being said, the Kings need more out of Keegan offensively. And to me, my number is average 17 plus points a game for the remainder of this season and going through the playoffs. If you get that from Keegan with the 4, 5, 6 rebounds that he'll hopefully give you, and then the better defense, you should be okay. So I think just getting a consistent near 20 points per game from Keegan on a nightly basis is going to be a big difference in the Kings offense getting back to what they're capable of being.
Yeah, for the Mavs, outside of Luka and Kyrie, it's PJ Washington. His defense has been transformational for the Mavericks. Fantastic. I thought he did a great job last night. And then he has not hit corner threes well at all. Like, he just cannot hit corner threes, and he started the game last night with 3 threes, like off of pick and pops, which I've been calling for forever. Run PJ Washington the pick and roll so you get, you know, a better, like, maybe they double Luka, which they did every time, and then all of a sudden you get a wide open shot for PJ. And so if he hits some of those shots, I'm really watching him down the stretch for the Mavs. There you go. Go listen to Locked On Kings. Go listen to Locked On Mavs. We'll both have episodes after the game on Friday as well. So win or lose, another huge game for both teams, and we'll see what happens with them. Guys, thanks for listening to Locked On Mavs, Locked On Kings.
Screw you, Raccoon Squad.